Dual extrusion 3D printers are amazing. You have two different colors of filament that are extruded through two separate nozzles, and that allows you to make two color prints. But things get really interesting when you mix those two extruded colors and make them come out of one nozzle, like you can in this Geeetech A10M printer that we're covering on today's Make Use of reviews. Having one nozzle at the hot end means, as well as being able to do two color prints, you can mix colors and create gradients. And this printer can do all of those things. There's just one problem. This isn't a 3D printer, this is a classic car. Hang on, did he just say this 3D print is a car? Yeah, that's a weird thing to say, but don't worry, we'll get to it. First, let's quickly go through the specs. The build area of the Geeetech A10M is 220 by 220 by 260 millimeters, and one quick look at the frame can tell you that this is obviously an Ender 3 clone. Now, that's no bad thing. That means that it's easy to get replacement parts if anything goes wrong, and they are widely available for cheap. Now, this is a dual extrusion printer, as previously stated, which means two extruders at the top which feed filament down to the hot end where they are mixed before coming out of the single nozzle. This printer will print PLA and it will also print ABS. There are other things you can try and print with it, but as far as I know, PLA and ABS are the only ones that are guaranteed to work. In this review, I only had PLA to hand, so that's what I've tested it with. It also has a heated bed, which comes with a composite PLA cover for the build plate. One nice touch is the filament runout sensors. There's one attached to each extruder, and as soon as it detects there is no more filament, it will send a stop command to the mainboard, which is a nice touch. Unfortunately, I never got to test the runout sensors, and we'll go into why that is a little bit later. The hot end has a single 0.4mm nozzle on the end, and this is also where you'll find the 360-degree fan ventilation system, which does a great job of keeping the temperature regulated, but is also pretty loud. The LCD screen is a simple LCD 2004 single color with a backlight, and you navigate the menus using a rotary encoder, and there is a reset button here for when everything goes horribly wrong. Using the rotary encoder is a little bit fiddly. I suspect they didn't really do much smoothing or debouncing on the rotary controller, which means that sometimes when you're trying to turn it up, it will jump down and jump around, but it is completely usable, and at no point did I get particularly frustrated with it. The printer also has both a micro SD slot and a normal sized SD card slot, which is nice, and also a USB-B port for connecting it directly to a computer. Now, Geeetech also provide all the tools you will need to assemble this thing, including lots and lots of spare parts, which is nice. You get lots of spare screws, a few spare nozzles, you get spare Bowden tubes for in case they block, which they will, and you also get a rather charming mouse mat, along with a scraper for the build plate and a pair of tweezers, which unfortunately mine fell apart rather quickly, but that's not really too big of an issue. And you do also get a micro SD card with the test print that they provide for you. There are other optional extras that come with the Geeetech A10M, none of which I had to review, but just so you know, there is a Wi-Fi module you can get which attaches to it, which allows you to connect to it over a network. That then opens you up to using their app, which allows you to monitor prints in real time. That's something I wasn't able to do, but I just wanted you to know that it is there. And they also have a 3D leveling probe that you can attach to make leveling the build plate easier, although leveling the build plate isn't a particularly difficult thing to do anyway. In terms of software, the manual for the A10M provided online suggests you use Repetia Host, which is a piece of software that I had never used before, but it is fairly simple to use. However, there are already profiles out there for Cura, for Simplify 3D, and for Slicer, and of course you can manually enter this into any particular slicing software you want anyway. One thing that is unique to Geeetech is their color mixer software, and this is a standalone app which allows you to import G-code that you've already sliced and then mix colors using an GUI that shows you what the mix will look like when it is done before exporting the colored G-code back onto the SD card under a new name. Building the Geeetech A10M is not particularly difficult. I think the 10 minutes they say it takes to build might be a little bit of a stretch, especially if you're doing it alone, but largely it's quite simple to do. The frame comes in two parts. That's the bottom part with the build plate and the arch with the Y-axis on it, and you will need to attach the Y-axis to the base, which can be a little bit fiddly if you're doing it alone, as I said, but it's not particularly difficult. They're just normal screws, and the two extruders will need to be attached as well, along with these filament holders. Other than that, all you need to do is attach the power supply to the frame and the LCD screen to the side, and then wire everything up, which is mostly a simple process. And part of the reason it's mostly a simple process is because Geeetech provide a two-sided full color guide for getting started with the printer, printer, which is very, very useful. There's a couple of moments where the images are very zoomed in on what you're supposed to be doing, and it's a little bit difficult to work out the orientation of the printer when you're supposed to be doing it, but for the most part it is very simple. Wiring it up is very simple. The composite cables are all labeled, and there's only really one place in each part of the printer they can fit anyway. However, the Z-axis limit switch is in a very difficult place to get in, and I had to get out a few very small tools and things like that to get it in there. If you have smaller fingers than me, or maybe just a bit more nimble, it might not be a problem for you. And then you'll be ready to do your first print. Now the printer comes with just enough filament to do their test print, which is on the micro SD card that I showed you before. It is G-code for this rather charming doggo here. However, this was not my first attempt. No, unfortunately during my first attempt I had a power cut. Now that's something very rare, that doesn't really happen here all that often, but it was almost fortuitous because one of the things that this printer has is the ability to continue where it left off when the power has gone out. Now, I don't know what went wrong exactly, but when the print was finished, I could see a rather ominous line around the neck of this charming little doggo, and then when I tried to take it off the build plate, bad dog? Not really. Bad printer? Probably not that either, but I'm still not quite sure what went wrong. I'm willing to put that one down to just bad luck. It could have been my fault. But yeah, my first print didn't exactly go to plan. However, unfortunately, after that, I had issue after issue with almost every single print that I tried to do. Now, I want to say at this stage that despite what I just said, I don't think that this is a bad printer whatsoever. What it is a printer that takes a lot of care and attention to get it dialed into that sweet spot to get good prints. The actual general operation of the printer is very, very easy. As I mentioned, while fiddly, the menu is easy to follow, and the software, the Repetio software, while not what I'm used to and in some ways a little limited compared to something like Cura, is perfectly easy to use, as is the color mixing software. The problem isn't with the day-to-day user operation, it's with actually doing all of the tweaking required to get it working. So this is a selection of some of the prints that I have done over the last while, and this isn't all of them by any means. I have a veritable Lovecraftian nightmare pit of failed prints upstairs, but this does kind of show some of the issues that I had with this printer. So sometimes the retraction settings were off, leaving stringy bits all over my prints, and that's fine, that happens with all printers, but sometimes the colors just didn't mix normally, and I changed settings for both of these things every single time, and sometimes there was an improvement and sometimes there wasn't. At one point early on, one of the Bowden tubes got a bit of filament stuck in the end, which meant I had to take the Bowden tube out and clip it in order to free the filament that was stuck inside it. Again, that happens with 3D printers, that's okay. Now you can see from these prints here that I had a few problems with layer shift, and I did everything I could in order to fix it. Now to their credit, Geeetech have a fantastic customer support line and a group of owners of the Geeetech printers on Facebook. Their forums are fantastic, and they have YouTube videos telling you how to fix all kinds of problems with the printers. And I didn't really think that this needed much in the way of tightening. I did it anyway, and I tried a few other things to fix the layer shifting, which I think is now fixed. I can't be sure, ask me again in a few months, but I think that area is now fixed. There is one weird design flaw, and that is the filament spool holders. Now they work just fine with smaller rolls of filament, but these, which I think of as regular sized filament rolls, hang down onto the plastic spring catch for the extruders. In fact, that's why I wasn't able to test the filament runout sensors, because if you have the filament runout sensors facing the direction they're supposed to be, they're in the filament on the spools. And yeah, I don't really see how they could have missed that, because it's not like I'm using weird third-party spools. This is Geeetech's own branded filament. But yeah, this issue was actually quite a big issue for me. When the plastic catches were digging into the filament spools, sometimes it would mean that the filament would try to turn past the catch and get caught, and then the spool would stop turning, and that would completely wreck whatever print I was doing at the time. Now, as I said, I have to give them some credit. I'm sure none of these problems are unique to the A10M, but reviews by their nature have a limited time frame. Now, I spent more than 3 times as much time on this review as I would almost any other, and I still feel like I'm barely scratching the surface of all the little idiosyncrasies needed to run this printer properly. As I also mentioned, I really have to credit Geeetech on their customer support. They are active in their forums and on their Facebook page, and when anyone has any questions, they answer them very, very quickly. As I also mentioned, their YouTube channel has a lot of very clear videos as to how you can use this and any other printer in their line. One thing I haven't mentioned so far in this review is the price. The Geeetech A10M costs only $239. Now, if you think of that compared to the amount of potential this printer has, that makes this one of the best deals out there. And if you look at some of the prints I've had, okay, yeah, this octopus didn't quite work out the way I wanted it to. It needs some work. But the color mixing, where it has worked, is wonderful. And I am absolutely certain that that is a case of getting this printer dialed in rather than any fundamental problem with the printer itself. When things do go right with this printer, it is wonderful. These two were probably my best prints. One is a low poly wolf, and the color of this is kind of interesting because I do not have filament this color. This is the dark blue glittery filament that you see at the top of the printer there, mixed a little bit with some of the white filament to give a slightly lighter color. And this came out wonderful. There are, of course, some of the hallmarks of FDM printers. You're not going to get print quality that gets anywhere near a resin printer, but still, when this printer's working well, it gives you beautiful prints. And by far, my favorite is this sort of Miami sunset colored doggo. This is the G-code that came with the A10M, and this is why I'm convinced that this printer is capable of great things. When the G-code is correct, when the settings are correct, it can do beautiful prints. And if you're wondering why there are a few marks on this, that's nothing to do with the printer, that's because this instantly took over from the resin prints in my last review as my son's favourite thing in the world. Hello! Doggy. Now, when I can print gradient best friends, I'm a happy dad. Which brings me back to my original, if a bit weird, point. This isn't a printer, it's a classic car, or more accurately, it's a kit car. It's something you get just for the passion. It's not practical, you get it because you want to actually get in there and fiddle with it. You have to be ready to spend more time tinkering with it than driving it, or in the case of this printer, printing anything useful with it. And I almost wonder if Geeetech know this, because this printer is set up for DIYers. It's set up for people that want to tinker. As I said, all of these parts are so easy to get and replace, and a quick cursory search, there's no one part of this that costs all that much. You could replace parts or completely swap them out. I've seen a version of this printer online which has 5 extruders, which is ridiculous. The main board inside here is a microcontroller that you can program with the Arduino IDE. They included a bootloader with it, and there are different firmware updates you can get for it. For this review, I used the stock Marlin 1.18 firmware that came with it. There is a Marlin 2 upgrade that I will be looking at some point in the future. There is so much potential here for people that like tinkering with things. And one of the nice features of a 3D printer that's so moddable is that you can print those parts yourself. Now, I haven't got around to doing it yet, but one of the things that is potentially an issue here is the fan intake, which is right under the build plate. Now, you don't want bits of plastic falling in there. This is where your stepper motor drivers are. This bit needs to stay cool. However, there are mods online which allow you to print out a fan cover and attach it to the printer. Same with the spool arms. I looked it up and there are spool arm extenders that you can print yourself and attach to the printer. There are even people that have made little runoff things to get the spare filament out of the nozzle without having to do anything. You can just program a custom movement. Everything in here is completely customizable. If you wanted to put your own build plate on it, I know a lot of people like using heat resistant mirrors, you could put a mirror on there and then change the preheating settings to account for the new thickness of the build plate. There is so much potential here for modability. And again, let me remind you, this printer costs $239 at the time of filming this review. So in short, is the Geeetech A10M a frustrating printer? Yes. Is it a bad printer? Absolutely not. It's certainly not for beginners. It's certainly not for anyone that wants to just have a functional printer that will just print things out, but in both of those cases, you probably want a simple single extruder printer anyway. No, the A10M is one of the most interesting printers I've ever laid hands on. Getting it working will take time and patience, but if you, like me, love tinkering with things and find fixing slightly broken toys way more fun than buying new ones, then the Geeetech A10M will keep you busy for a long time to come. So I hope you found this Make Use Of review useful. There is a written version of this review on the Make Use Of website, and if you're not subscribed to the Make Use Of YouTube channel, consider dropping us a subscription. We do lots of reviews like this. We also do giveaways and sometimes tech tips and tutorials as well. But for now, have a fantastic day and take care.